Hello everybody, and welcome back to my series where I take a look at how various games handle moral choice systems to try and better understand why some games do it well and other games do it not so well. And today I thought that I would take a look at an indie classic called FTL Faster Than Light, a roguelike where you fly around in a spaceship, recruit allies, and fend off the rebel fleet as you try to end a galactic war single-handedly. Now, this is not a game that's really centered around its moral choices, but it does still have them. In fact, it actually presents the player with moral choices pretty regularly, and I think that this game kind of acts as an interesting case study of what can happen when a player is presented with perhaps too many moral choices, as well as what happens when there's no real system that keeps track of your choices throughout your run. So, first things first, the actual moral choices that FTL presents to the player, I think are actually pretty well designed. For example, one of the most common choices you get are whether you choose to accept an opponent's surrender or not. Most of the enemies in the game will offer surrender instead of fighting to the death, and there's many reasons both morally and pragmatically why you might want to pick one option or the other. For one, you get different rewards depending on whether you accept the surrender. Usually a surrender comes with an offer to hand over some resources like missiles and fuel. However, if you choose to destroy the enemy ship instead, you usually get fewer specific resources, but you get a lot more scrap, which basically acts as your currency to upgrade your ship and buy stuff at shops. But of course, the context can matter pretty heavily as well. If you're in an asteroid belt or your ship is on fire or something like that, you might want to accept the surrender just to end the fight as quickly as possible. But if your enemies are pirates, you might want to destroy them just on principle. Or conversely, if your enemies are slavers, well, you still might not like them, but do you want to kill all of their innocent slaves along with them? I think that this is a really solid general moral choice. You have plenty of solid incentives to pick either option, both mechanically and morally, depending on many different factors that will change from battle to battle. Maybe you've already stocked up on missiles and fuel, so their offer of surrender kind of falls on deaf ears. Or maybe you normally spare pirates, but this time you caught one chasing down a civilian vessel specifically, and that was just a step too far for you. But of course, this is far from the only kind of moral choice you encounter in this game. For example, you can also encounter things like distress beacons, and whether you even bother going to a distress beacon can itself be a pretty significant moral choice. Going out of your way to help someone might mean not visiting another system that might be able to get you more resources. Sure, sometimes the people at the distress beacon could offer you some decent rewards for helping them out, but they also might barely have anything to offer at all, or it might even be just a straight up pirate laying a trap for you. There's no way to know until you go there yourself, so you're putting a lot of risk in play by even visiting them in the first place. Plus, you could even think of entire ship systems as a sort of moral choice. For example, you can replace your med bay with a cloning bay, which basically trades the ability to heal your crewmates for being able to recklessly sacrifice them at will and just clone up a free copy right after. Or you could take the mind control bay, which literally lets you force your enemies to fight each other to the death. Both of these are not exactly systems that I would consider not war crimes, and that's not even mentioning all of the other random encounters that you can come across, like people being trapped on a burning space station that you need to rescue, or the rather infamous giant alien spiders encounter. However, despite how good I think each individual moral choice is presented, I think that the overall design of the game ends up betraying their quality for a couple of reasons. For one, there is no real overarching system that actually tracks or responds to your choices over time. You can go through an entire run mindlessly killing anyone that tries to surrender to you for any reason, and thoughtlessly mind control all of your enemies to effectively commit Sudoku, and ultimately the game just doesn't really care or respond to that. The only overarching factors that play into the choices you make throughout a run are how many of each resource you have. If you're running low on fuel and you're offered a less than ethical way of obtaining more fuel, then the game will only reward you for taking that option because that's all that matters in the long run. There's not even like a throwaway line at the end of the game where they say, "You win, but at what cost?" or something like that. Compare this to games like Frostpunk, where you have to manage the material needs of your city, of course, but you also have to worry about things like the hope and discontent of your citizens. A given policy might help the material needs of your city in one way or another, but cause your citizens to lose hope in your leadership, or you might have to spend some of your resources trying to make your people happier. It gives you more to think about than the purely pragmatic elements of your choices, and I think that this issue is only further compounded by the second problem, which is the fact that FTL is, well, a roguelike. Ultimately, the structure of FTL is designed in such a way where you are meant to play the game over and over again with all these different ships and difficulties and weapon loadouts and whatnot. I literally have hundreds of hours logged on this game across who knows how many different runs, and I could say personally that when you're presented with so many thousands of moral choices in a row over all of this time, they all kind of start to just blend together. You probably stop even reading the full text after a certain point and end up focusing purely on what you get out of each option more than anything else. By your 300th hour of the game, the idea of actually stopping to really think about your choices is just time wasted. Now sure, I do think that this itself could be an interesting commentary on the nature of moral choices, and how overloading someone with all of these options can cause them to disconnect and become more pragmatic and less caring about the consequences of their actions. But I don't think that FTL was intentionally going for that. And ultimately, I think that these two issues combined make each of them into even bigger issues than they already were. If the game wasn't a roguelike, and it was just a simple campaign that was a few hours long and you were only meant to play through it a single time, then not having an overarching morality system would likely still be okay, because on your first playthrough, you're still much more likely to take each choice more seriously and really think about your actions, especially since you wouldn't even know for sure if your choices were being tracked in the first place. And conversely, if the game was still a roguelike, but it did have some sort of system that tracked your choices and gave you some kind of consequences for your actions, well then you would at least have some reason to think about your choices on each of your subsequent playthroughs. But having neither of these options at the same time means that it is just inevitable that if you play this game enough, that you will stop to really take any of the choices seriously, and you will just start to see them as percentage chances for getting certain resources. The actual morality of your actions just stops being a relevant factor, because that is the only behavior that the game is rewarding. So I think that the obvious lesson to take away from FTL is of course to avoid either of these issues. Overloading the player with an absurd quantity of choices can make each individual choice feel like it barely matters when compared to just making a handful of really important choices. And if you only reward your players for pragmatic solutions, then they're only going to think pragmatically. But of course, even more importantly, you need to consider how the overall design of your game may interact with its various elements as a whole, because as I said, I think that these issues combined are worse than the sum of their parts. So I think that if they were to ever make a direct sequel to FTL and to expand on the gameplay systems that they have here, I would personally love it if they added some kind of overarching reputation system so that your choices would at least have some kind of long-term consequences. It would not only solve both of the issues that I laid out here today, but it would also make subsequent runs more interesting as you explore being a goody two-shoes or an evil bastard in a variety of different circumstances. And luckily, you don't actually have to wait for a sequel to FTL to exist if you want to experience that, because there is already a mod that does almost exactly what I just described, called FTL Multiverse. I learned about this mod a little while ago, and I've had a ton of fun playing with it so far. It basically may as well be FTL 2 with how many new ships and factions and alien species and stuff that it adds, but most important for this discussion, it actually does in fact add a full-blown reputation system, literally the exact thing that I think FTL could use in this regard. It is relatively straightforward, but I still think that it's a really nice addition. Basically, if you do things that a particular faction in the game likes, then they may reward you appropriately. For example, if you suck up to the Federation, then you can get get discounts in the various shops in the game and free resources before you fight the final boss. But conversely, if you piss off the Federation, then not only do you lose out on those discounts, but you might end up getting attacked for your various war crimes despite allegedly being on the same side as them. And it tracks reputation individually for each faction in the game, so you could rub shoulders with pirates or Zoltans or slavers or any combination of all the different factions in the game and end up getting appropriate rewards or consequences depending on your choices. And I think that it works really well. Now, despite the fact that I've played so many runs, I still find myself taking each choice more seriously again and really weighing my options, both in terms of the material goods that I will get as part of my choices, but also what those choices will have in terms of an impact on the galaxy. And it helps me really get back into the world of this game again and get even more attached to the lives of my crew members before they inevitably suffocate in the void of space. But I think that that will do it for today, so as always I am happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. Feel free to let me know about your history with FTL, because let's be real, there's a solid chance that you've already played it a ton as well before you watch this video. And if you liked what you saw, make sure to leave me a like and subscribe. And if you want to help the channel out, my Ko-Fi is linked in the description down below. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.